I joined the Marine Corps 1 year ago today, September 12th, and I left 2 months later. In that short time, I learned the most valuable lessons of my life, like how the word yeah was actually destroying my life. 2022 was the most painful year of my life. I fell lower that year than I thought I could, and it was at my lowest that I decided something had to change, and drastically. I needed something to suffer towards, not away from. I needed purpose, I needed commitment. I needed to do the hardest thing I could think to do. I didn't fear death, and I haven't since. So I just needed something bigger than myself to fight for, to devote my life to. I actually called the National Guard before the Marines. Shameful, I know. They were offering a $50,000 enlistment bonus, so obviously I figured it would at least be worth looking into. Anyway, I tried calling them, but no one picks up for 2 days. Fine, I'll drive to the office. Well, turns out they don't have their office listed on Google Maps, so it sent me to the nearest base. The guy at the gate was kind enough to call the recruiter directly for me, but when I spoke to him, he just seemed inefficient and almost confused in some way. It was definitely not the interaction I expected from the military. My experience with the Marines was, as advertised, precisely the opposite. I called the Marine recruiter's office in Newcastle, Indiana, as soon as I got back home from base. Sergeant Oliver answered the phone. He was also a little surprised to find someone calling the office. Usually they have to go out and convince people to enlist. Here I was, willing and eager. While the guard seemed slow and disoriented, Sergeant Oliver snapped right to it and set up an interview for me early the next morning. This is the part of the video where I issue a formal apology to my mother for sneaking out of the house to enlist without any warning. Sorry, Mom. When I got to the office, it was like a machine. Sergeant Oliver and Staff Sergeant Black were direct, eager, confident, efficient, and brutally effective. Before I even sat down, I knew I found my people. I already made my decision. And when our conversation finally came to a close, I received my first of many lessons. So are you ready to enlist? He asked me. I looked him in the eyes, smiled, and said, yeah. I don't know how long he stared at me, dead in the eyes without saying a word, but it was long enough to start questioning if I had suddenly stopped existing. Still staring dead in my eyes, his face dropped and suddenly became about as stern as you might imagine. Finally, he spoke. Is it a yeah? Or is it a yes? I came back home with my shiny new Marine Corps folder, and once my mom stopped crying and hugging me, sorry again, I hit the kitchen. I was about 13 pounds underweight. I'd have to pile that on in 2 months if I wanted to make my ship date. So I spent the next 2 months in the delayed entry program, training with my recruiters and the other poolies, eating and running and puking and running and eating and puking and running. By the time my contract was signed and I was getting ready to leave, I still was just 2 pounds underweight. But since my recruiter is the best ever, he got me a weight waiver. I was good to go. And on September 11th, 2022, I had my last PT session with the other poolies. My recruiters gave a few speeches talking about 9/11 and motivating us to keep working, but nobody was listening closer than me. The next day, September 12th, 2022, I got on the plane and left for USMC Recruit Depot, San Diego. Receiving week was just about the most fun I've ever had. Everything I was excited about in the Marines, the yelling, the sleep deprivation, the discipline, all the hard and painful things I wanted out of this experience were actually happening. I was actually standing on those yellow footprints. I was actually wearing my camis. I was actually making my rack. I was actually in the Marines. I was facing something entirely new, something entirely unknown. Normally that's terrifying, being thrown into a different world entirely, being constantly harassed and confused by giant immaculate gods among men. But I had my platoon, 3233 Kilo Company. We were facing the unknown together as brothers. together until the terrifying unknown became the thrilling unexplored. And when we got to training, our world was rocked yet again as it all became very real. It was much harder, but much more exciting at the same time. Together we enjoyed our days of pride and accomplishment, and together we endured a few days where we were all homesick as hell. But that's just it. We all were. We endured the same hardship as a group. We always had each other. We went to chapel together, and even the guys like me, devout atheists at the time, found some semblance of God in a very real way. An entire theater packed full of broken and beaten men, every one of us with our arms over the shoulders of those beside us, sharing a rare respite and the comfort of a shared love. Together we learned not just lessons about combat and discipline, but lessons in morality and in life. To drive our heels in all that we do, to believe in ourselves and commit to each other, to make the man standing next to you your highest priority in the world. A few weeks into training, I developed a severe stress fracture in my right heel. I thought it was just really bad tendonitis, so I didn't report it. Everyone saw how much pain I was in, though. When we had to sprint as punishment during drills, my battle buddy, the guy right in front of me in my squad, Recruit Michael, would turn around and throw my arm around his neck and run with me, keeping the weight off my foot. He got IT'd for it on multiple occasions, but he didn't care. He stayed with me every single time. Finally, weeks later, when we were running the CFT, I landed on it wrong and collapsed straight to the ground. Of course, my series commander happened to be right behind me at the time, so I got sent to medical pretty damn quick after that. The doctor said I had the worst stress fracture he'd seen in almost 20 years, and I believed him. That shit hurt. After a few days with crutches, stuck on light duty, which is great for about 5 minutes until you get bored, I got dropped to the medical recovery platoon. I spent a week there on bed rest, where I met my closest friend from the Marines, Recruit Bauer. He's watching this right now, so I won't get too sappy, but he's a good man, to say the least. At the end of the week, I saw the doctor again, and he took a closer look at my foot. As it turns out, I have a pronation deformity in both feet. What that means is I'm highly prone to stress fractures, and they would only keep getting worse, happening more and more. Pronation deformity requires a medical discharge. I spent one more week there to heal up before getting sent to the separation platoon. Bauer and Waddell, my closest friends, were getting discharged too for similar reasons, and they arrived in RSP shortly after I got there. Some of the guys in RSP had been there for nearly a year, waiting for their paperwork to get unfucked, and it was hard enough being there for a few weeks. Everyone got there and complained for a few days until they learned how long some of them had been there, and then the complaints stopped entirely. The focus became helping each other get home, taking someone's paperwork from A to B, prioritizing those who'd been there longer than you. And while we waited, we kept sane in the little things we did. Bauer kept his rack to absolute perfection 24/7. Waddell drew tattoos he wanted to get. I journaled all day and all night long. When I left, waiting for my plane to depart from San Diego, I got coffee from the airport Starbucks. I was used to waiting in lines, so I didn't mind how busy they were one bit. I was coming out of the most selfless world I'd ever seen. And now all around me were civilians complaining about how their soy milk latte was taking too long. It's like stepping into an entirely alien world that you can hardly believe you came from. Leaving my brothers at that airport was one of the hardest things I've ever done. And I haven't seen them since. The lessons I learned in the Marines changed my life in ways I could have never imagined. I came back to YouTube and made it my business, and suddenly I had the skills to do it. I met people like me, building their businesses. Now all of my friends are some of the most impressive people I've ever met. They're an inspiration, and they constantly push me to be better than I am, just like my brothers did. I would never be where I am today without the Marines. I would never be who I am. I would never build what I'm building. I am what the Marine Corps made me. So when he asked me, is it a yeah? Or is it a yes? I can't even imagine where my life would be today if I hadn't stared back at him and said,